I'm joined now by governance expert and political analyst, Professor Gumede from the School of Governance at the University of Witwatersrand to talk about this. You heard this conversation from the Northwest provincial leader on what is happening inside, particularly how the voting delegates are interacting with the candidates who they should vote for. Gauteng said the same thing, that they're not welded to an individual, that yes, it was Cyril Ramaphosa, but they're now moving to Zweli Mkhize. And the mentioning of this document through the eye of a needle seems to be popping up quite a bit on the selection process. And if you look back at that document, it does talk about issues like how to select a leader. It talks about the natural process. It talks about canvassing for votes. But I'm just wondering, we have been speaking about this, you and I, over the past few days, this whole issue about the role and the structure of some of these entities within the ANC, the branches, the PEC. The quality of decision making, if you could just help us understand that how is the mandate that go out there and vote for Cyril Ramaphosa, but then the PEC says, no, actually we're doing an about turn on this.
Thank you for having me here. I mean, you know, the document, the Eye of the Needle, has been around almost now, maybe for 15 years in the ANC. So clearly either, members and leaders are not reading the document, or they're only using the document for rhetoric, because if you look at the leaders that they elect, the quality since the Mandela generation, so every 5 years, every conference, the quality has been reduced, the quality in terms of leadership, the maturity of leadership that gets elected, the technical capability of leaders that get elected are getting worse and worse. And they're also getting more leaders who are seemingly more dishonest leaders are getting elected. So the question with then is, do members and leaders actually read the document when they make these decisions of who they're going to nominate as leaders? Or is it just slogans? It's just a slogan.
And that's the thing, the selecting of text without context, and perhaps the context has maybe changed this time around 2022. Part of what the document speaks about is ensuring the leadership structures do not carry dead wood. I want to look at the top 7, those candidates that are being voted for at the moment. Obviously, we've seen some withdrawal for the position of Treasurer General Mzwandile Masina. What would we define as a dead wood? And in the context of the ANC, because we know that there are fissures within, but from society who obviously will be impacted by the decisions, the outcome of this.
So what is happening over the last decades is that the ANC appear to be voting leaders in which doesn't have the skill set and competencies that the country's problems need. We've got very, very deep problems, complex problems, high unemployment, deep poverty, the state failure, social disorder in the country, runaway crime. Now, the leaders that will resolve that needs a very high level of skill set, a very high level of maturity, very high level of emotional maturity, also, and wise leaders. But what has happened the last couple of years is actually the leaders of quality that's coming out for re-election has been almost at a distance to what is needed. And there's been a recycling of leaders continually, because just think about it. I mean, there's been leaders that gets re-elected and even at this conference has been nominated, who have been there since 1994 in the cabinet, for example, or in the leadership. So where do you get the renewal? Where do you get the fresh ideas? Given the fact that the last 15 years has been years of failure and years of decline. So if you recycle the leaders of failure and decline, you will get the next 5 years failure and decline.
Earlier on, my colleague Vuyo Mvoko was speaking about the campaign management, the campaign strategy on both sides, and obviously the quality of those decisions, given that there seems to have been some surprises. For instance, there were those who expressed surprise at the nomination of Tina Joemat-Pettersson for the position of Deputy Secretary General, when it was believed that there was coalescence around Nomvula Mokonyane. You heard Gauteng earlier on say, well, we're pretty much for anybody who's behind Paul Mashatile and Nomvula Mokonyane. And there are those who say that, you know, in fact, I heard Mamba Tabile Dlamini say earlier on, we need a leader who can unite us. And for all intents purposes, what she was saying was pretty much saying that that leader is not Cyril Ramaphosa, saying that the ANC needs a leader that will listen, even though they are in disagreement. But corruption seems to be at the center of all of this. And a point seems to be made by, dare I say, the former President Jacob Zuma through this private prosecution, that there's corruption everywhere. We can be discussing levels. So are these branches, are these delegates choosing from a low bar?
You know, the crisis in the ANC is so deep now that most probably what the ANC needs is leaders who have not been involved at any structure level of the ANC. Now, often, you know, when you get an organization, it could be a political organization, it could be a business organization, or even an NGO, when it is in such a crisis, and it is, say, corrupt, doesn't have the capabilities, doesn't have the quality of management, what organizations then often do is bring in leaders totally from outside, who's never been part of the organization. Political parties around the world, when they are in such deep crises, often bring in leaders like that, who has not been part of the structures, not been part of the branches, because what you want to bring is, you want to bring in a fresh way of looking. You want to bring in fresh ideas. You want to, bring in people who has not been compromised sort of by the dirtiness of the organization culture. So clearly, so the leaders that's right now that are available, and the campaign, this campaign has been so divisive, has been so bitter and so toxic. I wonder that whoever wins as a president of the ANC, whether they will be able to unite a party ahead of the 2024
and beyond
elections.
A united party. So through the Eye of a Needle talks about the ability of individual members or branches to shape the leadership, but as part of a broad collective of the ANC to be an agent of change. This current cohort of leadership and indeed cadres within the ANC, are they able to achieve that? Because I think you and I were having the discussion that the possibility actually does exist that you may have a new leadership that is ushered in that may, in a matter of months, possibly face criminal procedures or investigations. Absolutely.
You know, a number of the people who are going to be elected here, both at the top 7 and also the National Executive Committee of the ANC, I mean, after the conference, many of them will face investigations into corruption, into wrongdoing, and so on. So we may have new leaders who will soon not be able to concentrate on the work at hand and so on, because they have to focus on dealing with prosecutions, dealing with investigations, and having to explain what they did in the past. So instead of having a new group of leaders focus on governing and turning the ANC around, they'll be focusing on surviving and not being prosecuted.
All right, just a final one. This issue has come up time and time again, the issue of policy making. We heard that the voting will take place alongside commissions. And I'm wondering, is this possible, considering we're seeing a lot of chopping and changing in terms of what was expected? And is it really for the media or those of us who are observing to actually have some sort of stance where we say, well, it should be going this way based on what we're saying, given the animal that the ANC is? They've said to us time and time again, you don't know us as you think you do.
I mean, the focus has been so much on elections at this conference. I don't think there's going to be sufficient time for the conference to exercise their mind on policy. And yet, it is the lack of policy execution which is the problem that we're sitting as a country. So I don't think there's going to be time. And even after there's going to be a new leadership, either the new leaders, let's just say that Ramaphosa group of people are ejected and Zweli Mkhize comes to power and his slate comes to power. What then will happen is they will then now begin to look at new policies which will create chaos and paralysis, because it takes a while to bring in new policies first, and then to introduce the new policies, and then to push out the old policies. So it means, after they are elected, until the 2024 elections, there really is going to be a lot of muddling and paralysis in policy.
But what are we saying? That change could bring about policy uncertainty with a different slate, as in if Zweli Mkhize's slate wins? And is continuity necessarily the best thing for an ANC that is divided, that is Cyril Ramaphosa, which some have described or characterized as buffalo that's been wounded in this battle? So I'm just trying to understand, because also the point has been made that I think it was Dr. Blade Nzimande who was saying on the sidelines that ultimately you want a leadership that is going to be able to coalesce and work well together.
I mean, so even if Ramaphosa is re-elected and his slate is re-elected, given the divisions, it is going to be policy paralysis, because he will have to then try to unite the two groups, which is going to be almost mission impossible because they're so divided. So even from a policy point of view, it's going to be very difficult for him to implement his own policies. And secondly, the investigations into Ramaphosa is not going to disappear if he gets re-elected. So, so we're going to have issues that he has to focus on, that he has to deal with. That will deflect his concentration from governing and from implementing policy. So whichever group or slate win, they're going to struggle with policy execution. The Zweli Mkhize group to try to come up with new policies and so on. The other group, the Ramaphosa group, trying to focus on executing their policy while trying to unite with the RET faction.
And it also comes down to the question of what are they all fighting for? The person who does become president of the ANC, some are saying does not necessarily become the president of the country come 2024. Thank you so much for speaking to us, Professor William Gumede, who's a governance expert and political analyst.